I'm Russ Muirhead. I represent Grafton District 12, which includes Etna, Lyme, and Hanover, New Hampshire. I was asked to introduce this bill at the request of several New Hampshireites who participated in the Citizens Assembly, a 3-day event at St. A's that was held last June, consisting of sort of equal numbers of Republicans, Democrats, Independents. A bunch of citizens got together, talked about politics, discussed lots of breakout groups and discussions and deliberation about problems and solutions. And the single ballot primary, which is what this bill would create, was one of the solutions that garnered 80% or more support among the delegates to this New Hampshire Citizens Assembly. And I'll let some of the participants to that say more about that in a second. The idea is very simple, that instead of having ballots on primary days where you can only vote for Republicans or only vote for Democrats, all the candidates would be on one ballot. And every voter would have the opportunity to vote for any candidate. A voter could vote for a Democratic candidate for governor, could vote for a Republican candidate for the executive council, Republican candidate, or maybe even an undeclared candidate, independent candidate for the House. So they could pick the best candidates regardless of what parties those candidates identified with. And the two top vote-getting candidates would go on to the general election in a district where there's one seat. That's the idea. It's very simple. Some people call it a blanket primary. Some people refer to it as the Alaska model because it's used in Alaska. And some might call it a nonpartisan primary. And the principle behind it is that when taxpayers pay for elections and the state administers elections, then every citizen should be able to vote for any candidate who's in that election. Right now, the state's paying for and administering a party selection process for the parties. It's a huge subsidy to the parties. And voters have to compress themselves into one of the parties in order to participate on primary day. As you well know, 40% of New Hampshireites do not identify with a party. And for those people, they have to say, at least for that moment that they're voting, well, I'm a partisan in order to participate in the primary. And there's, of course, a huge disconnect, not just in New Hampshire, but more so, I'd say, really in the country, between citizens and the people who represent them in legislatures, which is why public opinion of legislatures, which should be the most esteemed and most powerful branches, Article 1 is the legislature, should be the most esteemed and powerful branches in constitutional democracy, are the most despised branches of constitutional democracy today. And you look at New Hampshire, 40% of the state, 40% of the citizens refuse to identify with a party. How many independents or undeclared people are there in our legislature, in the House and the New Hampshire Senate? About 0%. So the disconnect is pretty obvious. This single ballot primary would aim to strengthen the connection between representatives and citizens. Some object that it's unfair for people who don't strongly identify with the party to select the party nominees that go forward into the general election. And, well, if that were true, we wouldn't allow undeclared voters to participate in primaries. And parties have the option of having party caucuses or party conventions. They could select their general election candidates the way they select their state party chairs. But if they want to engage the common sense of the broad citizenry through an election that's run by the state, then they should allow every citizen to vote for any candidate. Others object that this would invite what's called insincere voting or strategic voting, where, say, imagine, I as a loyal Democrat am in an election where I can vote to select, the Republican nominee. I might vote for what I think is the weakest or most obnoxious nominee, thinking that they won't do very well in the general election. So I vote for someone I don't like in order to saddle my opposition party with a weak candidate. Well, this ballot, the single ballot primary, would actually eliminate strategic voting. It would eliminate it because you can only do that when you're sure the candidate you most prefer is going to go forward into the general election. Like when on your side there's an incumbent who's unchallenged or something like that, then you might, I don't know, if you're really clever and extremely cynical, register with the opposition party so you can cast an insincere ballot. It doesn't happen much. It really is only kind of the political science geek club that does this kind of strategic voting. Most voters are in fact sincere and vote with integrity. But this reform would actually eliminate that by making every primary contest a competitive primary. You can never be certain that your preferred candidate is a shoo-in and is going to go on to the general election. So I think that by making primary elections more compelling, turnout will increase, and the common sense of the citizenry will be brought to bear with more effect on our elections. And I think that would be altogether salutary. And so that's why I viewed the request from some constituents from whom you'll hear and from delegates to the New Hampshire Citizens Assembly with such sympathy. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Will you be taking questions?
Yes.
Are there questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. Next up is Marjorie Porter with New Hampshire Together.
Good afternoon, Chairman Berry and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Marjorie Porter. I live in Hillsborough, and it wasn't too long ago where I was sitting in your seats as a representative, trying to represent my constituents and make decisions that I hoped would make their lives better. So I appreciate how hard you work, and I thank you for listening to me. For the past year, it's been my honor to work with New Hampshire Together, a nonpartisan nonprofit whose goal is to help everybody, everyday citizens, become civically engaged. Our process helps them to identify common problems and encourages them to work together to find common ground and to seek workable solutions, which then can be put into action. During the fall, winter, and spring of 23-24, we held listening sessions throughout the state in every county to hear our citizens' concerns. And to make sure that we were hitting all the demographics, we commissioned a poll from UNH. There were many issues that rose to the fore of that poll. And I know you know some of them: the cost of living, housing, childcare. Those were all there. But what surprised us was rising to the very top were three major themes: political polarization and how it was dividing us, confidence in our elections and how we needed to improve that, and the lack of representation and responsiveness of government to the people that they represent. Over a 3-day weekend in June, New Hampshire Together held the first ever in the United States statewide Citizens Assembly at St. A's. And Representative Muirhead mentioned it, and I'll give you a little bit more detail. They came to address these issues and to find a solution. We strove to ensure that the 50 delegates who participated were demographically representative of the state as a whole. We worked hard to get people from north and south, east and west. We made sure that the delegates were of different political persuasions, and as a matter of fact, we had a pretty good match of, and a few outliers. We had some Green Party folks there. We had Libertarians, we had Democrats, we had Republicans, we had left-leaning undeclared, we had right-leaning undeclared, and we had moderate undeclared. They were all there together in this room, these rooms at St. A's. We made ground rules for respectful dialogue, and all had to agree to those rules. Delegates then chose a problem area, and they broke into groups, and they got down to work to do these 4 things: identify specific areas of widespread concern in their chosen topic, hear different perspectives, and that was one of the most important parts. Evaluate promising solutions. We had experts there from all over, all different aspects of their issues that they could listen to and tap into. And if the solution that they worked up required legislation, to take appropriate steps to make it happen. So in order for the group's policy recommendation to become an official recommendation of the first ever Citizens Assembly, it had to meet the very high bar of 75% of those in attendance accepting it and approving it. And in fact, the 4 proposals that came forward exceeded that. They were all in the 80%. This is a nonpartisan group of people.
Ms. Porter, just,
Yeah.
your time has expired, so I need you to bring your remarks to a conclusion, please.
Okay, I just have one more little paragraph.
That's fine.
I wish you could have been there to see this. It was hope-giving. And one thing I want to leave with you is that these were people, your constituents, my former constituents, who saw a problem and didn't just want to complain about it. They wanted to find solutions that worked. They are concerned about the polarization, and they feel they're not being represented. I urge you to listen to them today because they will tell you how people in the real world are feeling. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Will you be taking questions?
Yes, I will.
Are there questions? Seeing none, thank you. Next up is Bill Black. On deck will be Kate Markey. Mr. Black, welcome to Election Law.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me here to testify in support of HB 714. I am a retired physician and researcher from Hanover, New Hampshire, and I also work as a volunteer in the elections. We just went blank. I was also a volunteer delegate to the Citizen Assembly that you just heard about this past June. I was one of 50 volunteer delegates to that. As Mr. Murhead said before, the single ballot primary, with a single ballot primary, the separate Democratic and Republican ballots would be replaced by a single nonpartisan ballot for all statewide and congressional primary elections. The single ballot would include all the candidates from all the parties, and each candidate would have the option of including a partisan affiliation by their name. The single ballot primary would provide benefits to the voters, to the candidates, to the elected representatives, and to the general public. For undeclared voters, the single ballot primary would allow them would eliminate the need for them to declare a major party before voting. For all voters, it would allow them to vote for any of the candidates from any of the parties. For the non-major party candidates, it would make their filing requirements more fair. For the major party candidates, it would help them compete against the more partisan members of their own party. And the single ballot primary would have the effect of encouraging all the candidates to appeal more broadly to their constituency and to use less inflammatory rhetoric and fewer false claims.
Mr. Black, your time has expired. I'm going to ask you to bring your remarks to a conclusion. So everybody knows we operate on a 2-minute public testimony clock in election law.
Okay. So I'll just finish with the fact that even for elected representatives, what it would do, it would allow them to vote their conscience and to represent their constituency without the fear of being primaried from a smaller, more partisan special interest group or an out-of-state special interest group. And for the public, this is my last sentence, for the public, it would reduce partisan polarization, and it would improve political representation and the responsiveness of their government.
Okay. Will you be taking questions from the committee?
Yes.
Are there questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. Secretary Scanlon, would you like to go now, or do you want to wait till the end? Okay, that's fine. Next up is Kate Markey. After that is Tiani Coleman.
Hello, my name is Kate Markey. I live and own a business in Manchester, serve on our Housing Commission, and am a member of our Rezoning Steering Committee. I have also been an election worker and served as a selectman, which in Manchester is basically an elected election worker. So I'm here to support House Bill 714 to create a single primary ballot. As an election worker through several election cycles, it has been my experience that primaries cause frustration among parts of our electorate. I cannot count how many times I've heard, I just want to vote for this person, and I don't care what party they're a member of. With the number of undeclared voters in our state easily outnumbering the number of registered Democrats or of registered Republicans, this is an opportunity for New Hampshire to lead in ensuring the people's vote directly chooses our candidates regardless of party. I also participated in the New Hampshire Together Citizens Assembly and was a member of the group tasked with exploring policy that would reduce electoral polarization. We were a very diverse group of individuals politically from far left to far right, everything in between and outside of that spectrum. And we were all residents of the state who cared very deeply about the work we were doing. Through discussion, we discovered that we all felt having a single ballot primary would reduce polarization by allowing the majority rather than a minority pick candidates for the general election. It was really one of the few concepts we all agreed on that we felt would actually reduce polarization. Manchester and Nashua both hold successful single ballot municipal primaries, nonpartisan. I have worked the Manchester primary. There are less questions and conflicts with the single ballot and no concerns from undeclared voters about being left out of the process. There are 4 states in the U.S. already doing this, and they report it has not favored one party over another. This is an impactful, tangible way to hear all of New Hampshire's registered voters in the primary process. I ask that you please support HB 714, which gives voice to all New Hampshire's registered voters. Thank you.
Okay, will you be taking questions?
I will, if people have them.
Are there questions from the committee? Representative Gilmore.
Besides Alaska, what are the other 3 states?
Oh, that is a great question. Nebraska,
Louisiana.
Washington,
California.
California. It's 2 blue and 2 red states. Yeah.
Representative Lane, do you have a question? Okay. Ward 9, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Ross.
that's right. See, look at that. Great memory. Next up is Rep Reed. She gets to cut. Sorry, we let the rep because we're in committees, so I usually let the representatives cut. I apologize. Treat them all fairly.
Apologies. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, honorable members. For the record, my name is Ellen Reed. I represent Rockingham 10, which is Newmarket and Newfields. I am in support of the concept of the bill. I am a supporter of open primaries. However, I believe as written, and I know that this was worked on by a number of people, as written, this could cause more harm than good if the committee is serious about the concept of an open primary. You're not going to like what I have to, or some of you won't like what I have to say. So the problem that I see is that what we call single party sweeps. So for example, we are familiar with multi-member districts as state reps, and you may have a district that is 60% party orange and 40% party purple. And you have multiple seats, and this is a multi-member district because you have a top 2. So it's like having a 2-member district, right? Even though numerically you might expect a lot of times that to be split, 1 orange representative, 1 purple, you often get that 60% determining all the winners. So you may, for this purpose, end up with only 1 party represented on the general ballot. Depending, even if the votes were only like 55% in favor of 1 party, that's 45% of people whose voice isn't being heard for the purposes of candidates on the general ballot. And I'm sorry if I was drawing an analogy that got confusing. I was relating the concept of a primary to the general ballot the way we relate a multi-member district, because what you have is when you have top 2 or top 3 or top 5, you essentially are creating a multi-member district. The other thing is that we already suffer from a decreased turnout in primaries, and what this does is amplify that problem. There is a way to get around that problem, and around the problem of having the single party sweeps, and that's to make the results proportional to the votes. And this is where I might get pushback. There is an easy way to make that proportional, and it's called ranked choice voting. I promise I am not simply testifying to talk about ranked choice voting, but an open primary without ranked choice voting has the potential of amplifying the very small voice of people who turn out into a primary, not just the people who turn out to a primary, but a narrow majority of people who turn out to the primary are dictating all the people on the general ballot. But if you do with ranked choice voting, there's two ways to do it. You end up with proportional representation on that general ballot. So now you have the 45% or the 35% getting some selection that appeals to them on the general ballot. So you can either do single transferable vote, which is what ranked choice voting is when it's applied to a multi-member district. So if you had like a top 4 or top 5, you could do single transferable vote, or you could simply set a threshold, say 15%. And any candidate who gets over 15% would end up on the ballot. So that wouldn't be a top 2 or top 3. That would just be whoever gets over 15%, which would be between 2 and like 6 candidates on the general ballot.
Representative, I'm going to have to ask you to bring your remarks to a conclusion. We've gone over your
All
time.
right. With that, I'm happy to take questions. I see issues with how it's being proposed to be enacted. I don't like the idea of having only one party on the general ballot, which would become a problem. But there is a solution, and I do support the concept of open primaries.
Questions from the committee? Seeing, Representative Grill, you've joined us. It's good to see you. Is your car fixed? Excellent. Next up is Tiani Coleman, and then Warner Horn is on deck.
Hello, I'm Tiani Coleman, and I'm here today in my capacity as myself, an independent voter, as well as a leader of a nonpartisan citizen group called New Hampshire Independent Voters. I do other things. I'm not here in that capacity today. So I have been a resident of New Hampshire for over 11 years, and as an independent voter that entire time. I became an independent voter, unaffiliated voter, about 12 years ago. But about 20 years ago, I was the chair of the largest county in the Republican Party chair of the largest county in Utah, over 1 million residents. And I worked in the inner circles of party politics within that county and within the state. And then later, I became a campaign manager for a U.S. congressional candidate who was a moderate Democrat running in one of the most conservative counties in the state. So in those two experiences, I was able to experience inter-party politics in areas where you didn't have very much power, as well as like in the capital city of Salt Lake City, proper Democrats actually had a lot of power, but in the state, Democrats had no power. So I got to watch a lot of things, and I came to see that corruption does not belong to any party. Corruption belongs to power. And that was when I started thinking, what can we do to change the way the electoral system works in the state, which was a caucus system, and there was a lot of things, I'm not going to go into it, but I started thinking we really need to make some changes. And I'm also an attorney, and I came across Justice Scalia's, a little after 2010, I came across Justice Scalia's landmark decision in California, Democratic Party v. Jones, that came out of California, where they decided that what was it called? A ballot, it's called a blanket primary. They decided that a blanket primary was unconstitutional. A blanket primary is when you do it single ballot, but you're still choosing the party nominees. But Justice Scalia had a little sentence in there that really piqued my interest, and it was a sentence that said, but parties don't have, primary elections don't have to be by party nominees. You don't have to be selecting party nominees in a primary election. They can just do a nonpartisan, he could call it a nonpartisan. If it's nonpartisan and you're not selecting the primary nominees, then it's perfectly constitutional. And I was like, wait, what? And that's when I started, really working hard as an electoral reformer, working in favor of such things such as nonpartisan primaries. So I favor nonpartisan single ballot primaries because independent voters' rights are very important. And a law review article in 2019 and
I got to get you to bring your remarks to a conclusion. Your time is way past. I'm trying to get your attention.
Oh, that's really too bad because I have so much more to say. But let me just say, let all voters vote. Independence and the expansion of voting rights in the United States is a very important law review article, Taro Law Review, where they talk about how the rights of independent, unaffiliated voters is one of the new frontiers of the civil rights and the voting rights struggle. And as an independent voter, and as independent and people who are independent candidates really need to have a level playing field in electoral politics to be able to open up the market of the political system. Right now we have a closed market, and the state is funding two parties. And then they're saying that they're only going to choose one person out of that party.
I'm going to have to ask you to end because if I don't enforce it on you, I can't force it on anyone. So I'm going to have to ask you. I believe I've given deference.
Okay, can I have one more sentence?
I'm sorry, I'm not going to allow that. I've already allowed you to bring your remarks to conclusion.
Please allow me, because it's really, just one more sentence.
I'm going to respectfully decline because I need to enforce the rules uniformly, and I'm sorry. Next up is Warner Horn.
She take questions?
No, she can't take questions if she wants.
Have questions.
Yes, that's fine. You like questions?
Yes, I do have a question. You referenced a 2019 article. Could you make sure that it gets into the committee's hands so we can review it?
Yes, I can send you a link to that article so that you can read it. The article itself is not about nonpartisan primaries per se. It's about the rights of independent voters. It's about the importance of voting rights of independent voters. Further questions from the committee? Representative Wilhelm?
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks for taking my question. What was the last sentence you were going to say as part of your testimony?
I'm going to roll that out of order as much as I do love the tongue in cheek of it. Thank you. Next up is Warner Horn. Welcome to Election Law.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Warner Horn, and I'm going to help the committee by not repeating all of the excellent points you guys have heard already. Instead, I'm going to give you my feedback on the Citizens Assembly that took place in June through the eyes of a former legislator. So I went to the committee. I was intrigued by their offer of civil discourse about all sides being heard equally. And to my great surprise, they meant it. We had 48 hours over 3 days of excellent communication, respectful discourse. Points were heard, and when there was disagreement, there was no polarization of feelings. Everybody walked out of there at least willing to shake hands, if not willing to stay civil. And the most intriguing thing to me as a former legislator was they were bringing information forward that I would not have considered in any other context. I've had more than enough constituent engagement as a representative, and they were saying things to me that I hadn't heard. Which makes me think there is exceptional value to the organization and the process by which we got this legislation out. We, as legislators, are starved for the information that helps us make decisions. We go to great lengths to secure it. For these individuals to have organized and produced a way for us to learn more about what the New Hampshire citizens are thinking and feeling, that's exceptional and valuable. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, are there questions from the committee? Representative Lane.
Thank you for taking questions. Both Representative Wilhelm and I were at the conference, and I echo, you correctly explained what happened, so thank you. My question is, what other things came out of this assembly than this bill, and do they relate to this bill? Or do you know?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Were there other initiatives that might be related to this bill that came out of the assembly?
there were 3 initiatives that passed the 75% threshold, and they were all fairly unique in that respect. So any of the other things that were discussed wouldn't have made the 75% margin and wouldn't have been valuable connected to this specific legislation.
Further questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. Next up is Eric here. And then on deck is Stephen Bourne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I speak this afternoon in support of HB 714. I am Eric Herr, resident of Hill, New Hampshire. The bookends of my career have been public service, first on the staff of a Republican President's Council of Economic Advisors, and in New Hampshire assignments for every governor from Shaheen through Sununu. Elections took on a special significance for me when, as Hill moderator, I watched our citizens exercise their right and duty to vote. But it was striking that voters' first act at the polls was to choose a party's primary ballot, despite independent voters being the state's largest voting bloc. Perhaps we should revise our motto: live free or die, but vote Republican or Democrat. Today, the purpose of our partisan primary system is to nominate a Republican and a Democratic candidate for public office, effectively making voting districts agents of our 2 political parties and local taxpayers the funders of that agency. But the essential purpose primaries should perform is to ensure that candidates making the general election ballot reflect the will of the citizens of New Hampshire, independent of party affiliation. 3 essential pro-democracy principles follow. First, that all votes count. Second, that all votes cast for a candidate are tallied in that candidate's total vote count. And third, that all candidates are treated identically. Our primary process, partisan primary process, fails these principles. To illustrate, today a write-in vote on a Democratic primary ballot for a candidate on the Republican primary ballot is not included in the total vote count for that Republican candidate. Effectively, the vote doesn't count, and that Republican candidate's total vote count does not reflect the will of all the people. HB 714 remedies these anti-democratic failures. At Gettysburg, Lincoln memorialized our national sacrifice to preserve a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. With your support of HB 714, you have the opportunity to place the people, not political parties, at the center of New Hampshire's primary elections. Your vote will speak volumes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Here, will you be taking phone calls? Woo. Will you be taking questions? Wow, my mind just slipped a gear there real fast. Are there questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is Stephen Bourne, and on deck is Daryl D'Angelo. Is that written testimony? Just put it on that side of the desk for me. Oh, you're going to reference it? Then it can be distributed. That's fine. My apologies. Yeah. So those know, if you have copies of written testimony, we put them up front for collection later. If you have something you're going to reference in your testimony, like a graph or something like that, obviously we have to have that to hear you. But that stops the
What I just did.
the paper. Well, what happened is towards the end of the day, it'll just be like, and you can't find anything. All right, we're ready to go when you are.
All right, thank you. I'm Stephen Bourne from Rye. If you know me, you know I'm not political or ideological. I'm an engineer, and I can't stand something that's not working. I've been at this for over 20 years. I passed out examples of some of the things I've been doing, in addition to being on the planning board, budget. I wrote a book. Those numbers I'm going to ask you to help me demonstrate right now. So I would like you to all briefly just stand up. And Russ, I used 18, so can you stand up too? Just briefly stand up, please.
Seated. The committee's got to remain seated. I'm sorry. The committee has
It's
to
very
remain
hard to demonstrate.
I understand, but you're going to have to, we'll have to use our imaginations. I don't care what the public does, but I'm going to ask the committee members to stay seated.
All right, so much for the effect. If everyone stood, all right, the points I was going to make, that you represent the 1.1 million registered voters, or about 96% of the people who've registered to vote. All right. Our common goal should be have 100% of the people participating in all local and state elections. All right. With the one goal of managing our government better. In November 2024, we only had 75.5% of the people, registered voters, vote. So it's going to have 4 of you sit down, Russ and 2 of the others. Okay. Now you get a picture of that besides looking at it. All right. Now in September, all right, only 22% of the people who voted participated in the September primary. So we're going to round up to 4. All right. And that leaves everyone else that represent the 78% of the people who voted in November. All right. But did not participate in the primary. All right. So everyone sitting, who is going to be just about everyone else except for the people at the ends. All right. You need to hope that the people sitting, or the people still standing, those 4 people, all right, represent who you want to see on the November ballot. All right. What you're looking at, with just 4 people representing all of you, is a leveraged system. All right. A disproportionate amount of people have power greater than their size. All right. That's just known as disproportional power. All right. Our partisan process, because of that, is broken. All right. There's also other issues this caused. In 2022, I ran as an independent. When I asked people who had already voted if they voted for me, none did. They also admitted that they had no idea who the Republican or Democrat options were. As we just had a great conversation and they were not enamored with either party, I asked, why not support an independent? Everyone said they voted against the party that scares them the most. In our New Hampshire system, people are voting against, not for people. For many undeclared voters like myself, there are people running in the primary on both sides that I prefer much more than those who make it to the November ballot. We're paying for the primary, and I want the right and the freedom to vote for the candidates I like, regardless of party affiliation. The parties are not paying for these partisan primaries. We are. After the 22 September primaries, I did some back of the math envelope to estimate what cities and towns pay. All right. It worked out to be around 4.5 million what cities and towns pays. That does not count what the Secretary of State pays for these. That's something that 900,000 people in New Hampshire did not use. All right. It's no mystery that the New Hampshire Citizens Assembly, this came out as something we should move forward. So the first thing I did.
Well, I'm going to have to, your time's expired, so if you can.
Well, I had to use a lot of it, not getting you to stand.
I understand, but your time has expired.
So just briefly, I went through all the RSAs, and what I learned, all right, is that we've created, our RSAs have created 2 classes of people, those in the parties and those who are not. All right. It keeps people from participating in the process. All right. And everything you're going to hear, all right, opposing this, all right, is a challenge. None of this is a showstopper. Everyone is a solvable problem. Myself and others are more than willing to work with us to make this change that should get us our common denominator goal, which is getting more people participating in our process. I will be more than glad to answer questions for 2, 10 minutes, or 30 minutes.
There is no time limit on questions. I've never imposed one of those. So.
All right. So I handed out a lot of stuff and asked anything you ever wanted to know about.
Are there questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you.
All right. Lucky I'm in sales and I'm not hurt.
Next up is Daryl D'Angelo, and on deck is Lynn Briggs.
Hi, I'm nervous. Sorry. My name's Daryl D'Angelo. I'm from Amherst, New Hampshire. I have been an independent, unaffiliated voter my entire life. And I've drifted in and out through the primary process here, but always immediately disaffiliated because I kind of float that way. And over all these years, I've watched things move further and further away from representing me. We often speak of the state as a controlling and limiting entity, but at its best, government seeks to remove barriers that prevent people from freely exercising their rights and freedoms. HB 714 is an effort to increase freedom and choice for all granite staters. Our current system is experiencing multiple problems. For one, toxic polarization is negatively affecting our state. It's a phenomenon that didn't originate here. We didn't start it, but it's hitting us very, very hard, and it's creating an environment of fear. I was a ballot clerk for many years. Our town won't let me participate anymore as an unaffiliated voter because they're worried about challenges. They only want an even number of registered people at the tables now. Anger and marginalization are leading to disenfranchisement, withdrawal from the process. The people that do participate misuse the process frequently just to cast no votes. We're stifling the marketplace of ideas. We are blessed by the foresight of our founders who codified freedom of speech in our First Amendment. It's often said that the best answer to bad speech is more speech. Nowhere is this more true than in the marketplace of ideas. Yet our current primaries systematically exclude the voices of everyone not directly affiliated with one of only two political parties. And competition is being stifled. Competition requires free speech and equal ability to discuss and debate ideas. And finally, we have unequal ballot access. As publicly funded events, our primary elections must by definition be open to the public. But that doesn't merely mean voters. Public includes the voices of the largest voting bloc in our state, the unaffiliated. Our primaries provide public funding for private organizations, the parties. And since the public foots the bill, the barriers to participation have to come down. HB 714 recognizes and attempts to remove these barriers. Our forefathers fought for their independence from England because as a colony, they were being taxed but had no representation. Representation is fundamental to America's liberal values. As a New Hampshire property owner, I help fund our state primaries. But as an independent, unaffiliated voter, I'm not represented in the process. Independent voters have no primary candidates from which they can choose other than those of the two major parties. I hope the committee moves this bill forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Will you be taking questions? Are there questions? Seeing none, thank you. Next up is Lynn Briggs, and on deck is Linda Bundy.
Good afternoon. Bill 7114, Lynn Briggs, Amherst, New Hampshire. Bill 7114, to me, speaking as a ballot clerk of several years, I am no longer a ballot clerk, is a problem because I would watch undeclareds, which is not a party, come in and be very aggressive, very angry, for whatever reason, I'm not making judgment, and demand a ballot or not. When they were finished voting, they would go get into the line where you change back. It seems to me that that is a really disgusting way to behave, a horrible way to have to choose. So if we have a Republican Party and a Democrat Party, which are private entities, then maybe we need an independent, undeclared is what it is, an independent party that is privately funded. Just throwing it out there from my observations and what's been going on. Last week I did testify about the undeclareds not choosing a party by the first Wednesday in June. It was extended to October. That allowed 4,000 plus Democrats to become independent or undeclared, which again is not a party. So we either have to choose the two parties, the private parties in June to participate in the primary, or we need to go to 3 private parties. And I'll just keep it that simple.
Okay. Questions from the committee? I will say, I am glad actually you reconciled that because I was wondering how you were going to get there. And you did. So cool. So thanks for that. I was sitting there, I was like, you were just here last week and you didn't say that. You didn't say. Next, any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, Linda Bundy. And then on deck is Kaylee Estradio. Yeah. It's going to get to the point where I don't even look for validation on it anymore. I'm just going to know that I got it right.
Good afternoon, Chairman Barry and members of House Election Law. My name is Linda Bundy, and I'm from Antrim. In June 2024, the New Hampshire Together Citizens Assembly brought together 50 New Hampshire residents representing a cross-section of the state's demographics and political ideologies. Over 3 days of discussion and debate, they found common ground and decided upon 4 key recommendations. One of these was establishing a single ballot primary. A single ballot primary allows all voters to consider all candidates without being restricted to one party. The largest group of voters in New Hampshire is undeclared, not Republican or Democratic. There is a strong tradition of people voting across party lines. It makes sense to simplify voting in the state and congressional primaries. This system would give voters more choice and ensure that winners have broad support. Our current system leads to both parties nominating candidates with more extreme views, both left and right. A single ballot primary is a step toward reducing polarization because it does not favor any side. I've worked as a ballot clerk in Antrim since 2022, and there always are undeclared voters who do not like having to declare a party in order to vote. On a number of occasions when I've explained this to them, they have stated, "I want to vote for the candidate, not the party." A single ballot primary eliminates the time and busy work that undeclared voters and election workers have to spend choosing a party before voting and then switching back to undeclared after. I agree with a diverse group of New Hampshire citizens from the Citizens Assembly who believe that a single ballot primary system will best serve our voters by reducing polarization and providing more meaningful choices. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bundy. I assume you're not taking questions while you're getting up. That's totally fine. Next up is Kaylee Estradio, and then on deck is our own David Scanlon. Well, we do elect him, so he is our own. Think about that. I just blew your mind there, didn't I?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman Barry and members of the committee. For the record, my name's Kaylee Estradio. I'm a Durham voter and public policy fellow with Open Democracy. We're a nonpartisan nonprofit representing 36,000 voters across the state. And today I am testifying in support of HB 714. As the merits of the bill have already been highlighted, I want to focus on today's party polarization. The hyperpartisan nature of today's political system was warned against by our founding fathers. In Washington's farewell address, he predicted parties would become, quote, potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them to unjust dominion. Madison also shared these concerns, noting in the Federalist number 10 that one of the core attributes of a, quote, well-constructed union was, quote, its tendency to break and control the violence of faction, which I think we could all use today. And with HB 714, this committee has the opportunity to do just that. The primary voting system should be built around the needs of the people it serves and not the other way around. This is not the case today, as New Hampshire taxpayers essentially subsidize political party candidate selection for the 2 major parties, despite independents making up the majority of the voting bloc. A single party ballot would work to bring the power back to the people and away from the party systems. 2 blue states, Washington and California, and 2 red states, Nebraska and Alaska, currently utilize single party ballots in their primaries, and none have found that the system favors one party over another. So for these reasons, I urge you to vote ought to pass on HB 714 to put people over party and better meet the needs of all Granite Staters. Thank you, and I will take questions if there are any.
Okay, are there questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. Last up is Secretary of State David Scanlon and Representative Gosowski. If you could grab the blue sheet for me.
Thank
Had
you,
a
Mr.
chance to take
Chairman.
it all in, Mr. Secretary. Now you get to opine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll keep this brief. First of all, I did have the opportunity to address the Citizens Assembly when they met last year. It was a really good exercise, and I hope that kind of dialogue continues around the state. They did a lot of outside the box thinking, and I think that House Bill 714 reflects that. But it would represent a really fundamental change in the way that we conduct elections in the state. And it would be heading in the direction of nonpartisan elections, very similar to what we do at town elections now, where people from whatever political persuasion get on the ballot, and the voters select the one that they want to serve as selectman or planning board member, whatever. This bill does have consequences from the standpoint of an election administrator. Having a single ballot does not mean that there's going to be less paper, because you're still going to have the same number of candidates, maybe even more if undeclared voters are allowed to participate on that ballot. And so it would either be a very, very long ballot or multiple pages. So I don't think that there would be a lot of savings in that department. And then there could also be unintended consequences. Representative Reed did a good job explaining how a community that is heavily belonging to one party could dominate the ballot. And the reverse of that could be true if you had a number of candidates from one party and just one or two of the other party, where the many candidate gets diluted, and the two minority candidates might survive the primary. And then what happens after the election's over and comes time to prepare the general election ballot, when you have, let's say, two members of one party that won the primary and no members of the other party, and you still have party columns, how does that ballot configuration look? I think that would require some statutory changes to sort that out. So I think those would be the concerns that I have, Mr. Chair. I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Okay, are there questions from the committee? Representative Gilmore.
Dave, have you ever looked at any of the California, Alaska, Nebraska, or Washington single? If you have, just curious.
Well, I've looked at California. California on a regular basis goes through a primary and ends up with candidates on the general election that are just from that one party that won.
Okay.
And if you are, let's say that happens, you have two Democrats that win and they're running against each other in the general election. The Republicans in that district are kind of disenfranchised because they wouldn't have somebody on the ballot that represents, their viewpoints in a general election.
Thank you.
Further questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. This is question from you, Mr. Wilhelm, or did you receive a text message?
I've got a question.
Oh, okay. Okay. We'll allow it. I'm interested to hear what this
Mr.
question
Secretary, could you just talk about the administration of a primary like this? Like what challenges do you see? Is it something that you could do, or what are some of the changes to statutes that you think would need to be made in order to execute something like this?
It would require quite a bit of thought. We would have many more candidates running in the primary when you're incorporating all the candidates from both parties and maybe other parties or undeclareds that want to run. We would have to come up with a fair rotation scheme, which we talked about earlier today, and then try and figure out how that would work along with their party affiliations. Would they be listed on the ballot? How would that work? Yeah, I mean, there would be primarily ballot layout issues.
Okay. All right. Further questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you, Representative Scanlon. I don't think I have any more one else signed up to speak on this. So we're going to close the public hearing on